Dalhart in winter, a land swallowed by silence. The snow came early that year, heavy and unrelenting, blanketing the plains like a shroud drawn over a dying body. Dalhart, a modest town built of timber bones and cowhide dreams, was reduced to a hushed shadow of itself. Buildings leaned under the weight of frost, their windows blinking dimly through drifting white. Even the horses didn't whinny anymore. They stood still in their stalls, their breath clouds in the still air, as if speaking aloud might shatter something sacred or brittle. The sky, usually expansive and blue, turned red and meat-colored, the kind of hue that reminded old men of slaughterhouses and younger men of war. In this strange silence, time itself seemed to pause. The usual cadence of hammers in the blacksmith yard, the bustle at Miller's store, the rumble of wagons, all gone. Even the crows had vanished, replaced by an eerie stillness that crept into every crevice. The wind howled through town like a lost voice, rattling windows and tearing at signs. And then, cutting through the silence like a tired sigh, came the late train from Amarillo, 5 hours behind schedule, dragging its cars across frozen rails, as if each mile cost it a limb. At the station, barely warmed by a rusted stove, stood Samuel Holt. At 41, he was a man carved from the plains themselves, tough-skinned silver at the temples and marked by 2 widowed gravestones. He had no business in Dalhart that morning. His ranch, Holt Ridge, sat 30 miles north, nestled high in black-timbered hills. His horses were safe in barns packed with straw, and his ranch hands were likely half drunk by the fire. But something had stirred in him before dawn, a feeling like the memory of a fire long extinguished. It pulled him from his bed and into town, though he couldn't have said why. That morning, nothing was as it should have been. The station platform looked more like a ghost's rib cage than a place for travel, and Samuel, veteran of storms and slaughter, felt a cold that wasn't from weather alone. Something was waiting in the quiet, and he'd come face it, though he didn't yet know its name. The fateful meeting. The girl on the bench. She was just a shape at first, a smudge of gray and frost clinging to a bench outside the depot. No ticket, no suitcase, no motion. Just a girl made of cold, wrapped in a coat too thin for mercy. Her knees were drawn up to her chest-chin, tucked between them, eyes wide open but unfocused, like a calf struck dumb by lightning. Her skin was waxy. Her dress soaked stiff, and snow clung to her lashes without melting. She didn't move, didn't shiver. She looked like death waiting for permission to speak. Samuel nearly passed her. He was halfway to the door before something in her stillness stopped him. It wasn't sleep. It wasn't death. It was something worse, emptiness, a kind of hollow that screamed louder than any voice. He turned back, approached slowly, and crouched beside her. His gloved hand rested gently on the iron bench, careful not to startle. "You waiting on someone?" he asked. Nothing. He tried again, quieter now. "What's your name, girl?" Her lips cracked open, brittle and bloodied from the cold. The word was barely a whisper over the wind. "Willa. How long you been out here, I don't know." She didn't lift her head. One of her knuckles was raw and bleeding, chewed until the skin peeled. The wind howled down from the ridge, and Samuel scanned the sky. No stars, no moon, only dust and gray. He took off his coat without thinking and laid it over her shoulders. She didn't flinch, but her eyes followed him now. "You got kin in town, no? Where's home? Nowhere. Just bones and frost." She was no older than 17, maybe younger, and whatever fire had once lit her eyes had gone out with the ranch she'd fled. Samuel didn't ask more questions. He stood, lifted her gently in his arms, light as straw, colder than steel, and carried her toward the wagon. By the time he laid her beneath the blankets, her eyes had closed. The act of salvation. Arrival at Holt Ridge. The wind howled louder as they left Dalhart behind snow, chasing the wagon like ghosts unburied. Samuel didn't speak. Neither did she. The coat he'd wrapped her in barely moved her breath, shallow and thin as candle smoke. He kept a hand on her shoulder, checking for life, for warmth, for any sign she was still tethered to this world. She never woke during the ride. Holt Ridge rose from the snow like a ship through fog, 50,000 acres of frozen pasture and black forest. A place built with blood and contracts cattle and silence. The main house stood firm against the blizzard, lanterns glowing in the windows. No wife waited inside, no children, only maids with lowered eyes and ranch hands who knew better than to ask. Samuel carried Willa through the front door and up the stairs without a word. The guest room hadn't been used in years. Dust clung to the curtains, but the bed was clean and she barely stirred as he laid her down. He stoked the fire, fetched a pot of stew, and wrote a note in his sharp, slanted hand. "Eat, then we talk." She didn't wake until morning. Her throat burned when she tried to speak, but she ate. And she didn't run. The days of silence. 2 lives in parallel. She stayed. Not because he asked her to, and not because she trusted him. She stayed because there was nowhere else to go, and something about Holt Ridge, the way the snow moved like ghosts through its pines, the way the walls didn't echo, offered a kind of safety too worn to be soft. It wasn't comfort. It was absence. And for Willa, absence was better than what had come before. The first days passed in quiet, their rhythms orbiting but never colliding. She rose early and went to bed late, as if refusing to be caught vulnerable in either dawn or dusk. She swept the porch, though no one asked. Washed dishes no one had seen her use. She stayed clear of the bunkhouse and moved like someone raised by wolves, alert, hungry, but cautious of firelight. Samuel didn't press. He watched. From windows, from shadows, from the corner of a room. He brought her things she never requested, gloves too big for her fingers, a heavier coat lined with sheepskin boots, a half-size too large. She took them with a nod, but never a thank you. Not because she was ungrateful, but because words still cost her too much. At night, she would sit near the hearth and stare into the flames like they owed her an answer. He would sit at the other end of the room with a ledger on his knee and a bottle in reach. Sometimes they sat like that for hours, saying nothing, the only sounds the ticking of the clock and the wind clawing at the walls. She never cried, never whimpered in her sleep. But her eyes told stories she hadn't yet spoken, and in them he saw not just sorrow, but survival. They existed beside one another like stone and stream shaped slowly by contact, but never quite blending. Not yet. The past burns through. Willa speaks of fire. It was weeks before she told him anything. The stew had gone cold between them, and the fire had shrunk to coals. She sat with her knees drawn to her chest, not childlike but defensive, and her eyes flickered toward the flames like they might reach back. He asked her again gently, "Where were you from?" She didn't look at him, just the fire. "They burned it," she said. Her voice was flat, not hollow, but measured like a blade being unsheathed. "My father stayed with the land. Said they'd have to drag him off it. They did. They didn't drag him," she said. "They killed him." Then they burned the barn, the house, everything. Who she said the name like spitting blood, Clayborn, the Clayborn men. Samuel leaned back slowly. He'd heard the name before. Everyone had. The Clayborn family had once been ranchers, but ambition twisted them. Cattle thieves wearing badges, they ran half of Gaza County with bribes and bullets. There'd been whispers for years, quiet killings, land deeds forged, fences cut, but nothing this bold, nothing this final. He didn't ask what they'd done to her before they left her in the snow. He didn't need to. That night, when she went upstairs, he stayed up long after staring into the embers, wondering what kind of girl walks through fire and keeps walking. The transformation begins. Becoming flint, winter dragged on and the silence remained, but it changed shape. What began as distance became rhythm. Samuel began to leave small tasks, undone blankets, unstacked horses, untended buckets needing fetching, and found them quietly completed. Not perfectly, but with effort. Willa never asked what he expected of her. She acted as though proving something to the walls, to herself, or to the ghosts that trailed her. One day she asked to help with the horses. She wasn't strong enough to saddle them at first, her arms too thin, her fingers raw from cold and labor. But she learned. Fast. She watched him ride, watched how he moved with the animals, how he never pulled unless he had to, how he trusted the tension in the reins. She mirrored his posture, his patience, and soon the horses began to trust her too. He brought her a rifle one afternoon. Didn't say a word, just set it down on the fence rail. She picked it up like it was made of glass. He showed her how to load, how to aim, how to breathe through the shot. She fired into a bale of hay until her shoulder bruised and her jaw clenched tight. She never complained. The days grew longer. The snow melted into brown slush and then into hard-packed earth. And Willa began to fill the silence with more than chores. Her movements grew sure. She spoke more often, if only a few words at a time. And though she still flinched when someone knocked too loud or a bird burst from the trees, she stood straighter each day. Word spread in Dalhart that Sam Holt had taken in a girl, young enough to be his daughter, sleeping under his roof. Maybe not just sleeping. Sam ignored it. He'd been hated for less. And Willa, she didn't blink. Not when people stared. Not when they whispered. She walked into town beside him, shoulders square, jaw set. No makeup, no apologies. She was changing. And it wasn't kindness that made her strong. It was purpose. Whispers and watchers, or legend begins. By the time the thaw reached the lower hills, the stories had already taken root. Dalhart wasn't a town that stayed quiet for long. Word traveled faster than wind across the plains, and it didn't need facts to carry it. They said Sam Holt had brought a girl into the big house. Said she didn't leave for weeks. Said she had the look of someone who had either seen God or killed him. Some said she was his daughter. Others, more malicious, suggested something else. Something dirtier. No one said these things to Sam's face. They didn't need to. The silence that followed him into town said enough. Store clerks glanced sideways. Preachers muttered about appearances. Women crossed the street clutching their children close. And men, ranchers, drifters. Cowboys watched Willa with a gaze that flickered between fear and desire. They weren't sure what she was. Not exactly. But they could feel the heat off her when she walked past, like standing too close to something half buried and still smoldering. Willa didn't shrink beneath their eyes. She didn't smile either. She rode beside Sam like the saddle was an extension of her spine, her rifle slung low, her braid tied tight. When people whispered, she didn't flinch, and when they stared too long, she stared back until they looked away. Inside, Holt Ridge life took on a rhythm, quiet, steady guarded. Sam gave her space but not distance. He offered trust without conditions, a rare thing on land soaked in betrayal. And she responded not with words, but with presence. She never left the house without checking the locks. She started sleeping with her boots on and a pistol under the bed. At night, when the wind scraped the window panes, she didn't dream like other girls. She listened. Fire in the blood. The breaking of the colt. One morning in early March, with the frost still hanging like smoke in the valleys, Willa found Sam in the stable. Her boots were caked with mud, and her hands bore the scars of weeks spent earning silence. She stood with her shoulders square, her breath fogging in the cold. "Teach me to ride," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "You already ride." "Not like that. Teach me to break a horse." He studied her for a moment, then he nodded once. The coat was black and unbroken, barely 2 winters old, with eyes full of fury. It had thrown 2 stable hands already. Sam brought it out into the corral, with the quiet certainty of someone who knew pain couldn't be reasoned with, only outlasted. Willa climbed onto the fence and waited. What followed wasn't graceful. The colt bucked like sin incarnate, wild and screaming, and Willa hit the dirt hard, once, twice, 5 times in all. She cut her lip, split her elbow, spat blood onto the frozen ground, and climbed back on. Each time slower, each time more focused. She didn't scream, didn't curse, only breathed through her teeth and got back in the saddle. When she finally stayed on for more than 10 seconds, Sam didn't applaud. He just watched the way she leaned forward, spoke softly into the animal's ear. And in that moment, he saw something shift. Not triumph, not even pride. Something older. A glimpse of who she'd been before the fire, and maybe who she was meant to become. That night, she brought him coffee without being asked, and he sat at the table longer than he ever had before. The quiet shape of love. What's left unspoken. By spring, the town's curiosity grew louder. She rode with him now into meetings, into Amarillo, into Dalhart, into the world that once would have swallowed her whole. Oilmen looked at her like a prize. Ranchers called her Holt's new filly when they thought he wasn't listening. One of them laughed a little too loud outside the auction house, called her a pet with spurs. Willa turned eyes sharp as broken glass. "If I were yours," she said flatly, "I'd be dead already." The man chuckled, but it was nervous. Sam saw something in her, then something honed. That summer, a body turned up in Garza County. One of the Clayborn brothers, shot through the eye, hung upside down like meat. No one said Willa's name, but everyone remembered it. Folks stopped calling her a runaway. They started calling her something else. A weapon. Back at the ranch, she trained like a soldier, rode like a whisper, and shot like thunder. Sam didn't ask where she rode after dark. He didn't need to. He saw it in the way she kept her hand near her gun even at the supper table, in the way she slept door unlocked, boots on, face toward the window. They didn't talk about love, not like others did. But it was there, in the way she handed him his coat in the morning, in the way he left the last piece of bread for her without ever saying why. By fall, they rode side by side like partners, not lovers, not yet. There was a line between them drawn in dust and memory, and both were wise enough not to step across it too soon. But it was there. Always there. Age wounds and waiting. The space between them, there was no denying it anymore. Willa had grown into something sharp, something clean and hard as a rifle barrel. And Sam remained what he had always been, a man shaped by loss, steadied by work, quieted by age. Between them there was warmth, but also a space. She was 18, maybe 19. A woman by the measure of frontier law, by the glances of men in saloons, by the way she stood when danger whispered from the hills. But inside the wound that had brought her to Holt Ridge still throbbed, hidden beneath the surface, like coal under snow. Sam saw it even when she didn't speak of it, especially then. He never touched her, not like that, not when the fire in her hadn't yet settled. There was a reverence in how he looked at her, a caution not out of fear but out of respect, like a man who knew the weight of grief and didn't want to make hers heavier. She watched him too, not with longing, not yet, but with an awareness that tethered her to him across the silence. He brought her coffee in the morning. She sharpened his blades without being asked. He taught her how to read contracts, how to mend fences that didn't scream for attention. She taught him nothing outright, but something in her presence reminded him how to live without hating the past. The house they shared was not filled with laughter, but it was no longer cold. They didn't talk about love, but they both knew it was circling. Waiting. The first kill, smoke from the fence line. It happened on a Sunday. The wind had settled for once, and Sam was cleaning his rifle by the window. Willa had been out since before sunrise, riding the north fence line. When the shot came, it echoed sharp and deliberate, not the kind of sound you mistook for a coyote or a misfire. Sam dropped the oil rag, grabbed his shotgun, and ran. He found her by the barn, standing over a man, a dead man. The revolver was still smoking in her hand, and blood soaked into the dirt at her boots. She knelt beside the body not to pray, not to panic, but to examine. Her face unreadable calm, in a way that made Sam's throat tighten. Who, he asked, though he already knew. She looked up. Her jaw was firm, her voice even. Another Clayborn. There was no fear, no shaking hands, only blood on her jaw, not hers. She wiped it with her sleeve. "I didn't mean to shoot him in the throat," she said, voice quiet. "But I'm not sorry I did." Sam walked slowly, eyeing the mark on the man's hand, a broken C burned into the skin. Clayborn's younger kin, a scout. Maybe a warning, maybe worse. Sam didn't ask what the man said before she pulled the trigger. Whatever it was, it had cost him his life. Sam didn't bury him. He strapped the corpse to a horse, tied a message to the saddle, and sent it east back toward Garza County. Let them know she was not just surviving anymore. She was responding. What the town remembers. The girl who didn't flinch. Everything changed after that. Dalhart stopped whispering. It started speaking loudly. The girl up on Holt Ridge had killed a man, they said. Shot him clean through the neck and didn't blink. And Sam. He didn't throw her out, didn't bring her into the sheriff. He rode with her the next day, calm as ever, into town. Bought feed, bought salt, bought a new set of bullets. That silence between them. It wasn't silence anymore. It was legend. Preachers started preaching harder. Sermons about sin, women gone feral, Eve with a rifle instead of an apple. The ladies who once sent baked goods to the ranch now crossed the street. Children were told not to speak her name, but the men, The men looked longer than they should have, some with curiosity, some with hunger, all with caution. Willa didn't flinch. Sam began losing ranch hands. Some didn't want to work under a roof where a killer made coffee in the morning. Others didn't want to end up on her bad side. Only one stayed, a half-mad old cavalryman named Briggs, who spoke to horses more than men, and claimed Willa reminded him of a mare he once saw trample a Comanche scout to pulp. Smart, he said, but spooked deep. Gotta let her come to the reins on her own. She started wearing her father's hat after that. Wide-brimmed and black as a crow's wing. Some said it made her look older, meaner. Sam thought it made her look more like herself. The girl who'd once frozen on a bench had thawed into steel. And the ridge. The ridge belonged to her now. Riders, at midnight, they were watching us. By the time winter clawed its way back onto the ridge, Willa had begun riding alone again. Not out of recklessness, but because something had shifted. Something in the wind, in the way birds flew too low, and how the coyotes kept to the distance watching, but never crying out. She rode out one evening under a sky-bleached bone white, her mare steady beneath her, her rifle strapped across her back. Sam didn't ask where she was going. He didn't need to. He trusted her judgment more than his own, though he never said as much. The snow fell lightly, the kind of snow that didn't announce itself until it was already on your shoulders. She didn't return until past midnight. Her coat was torn across the sleeve, dark with blood. Not much, but enough to set his heart jumping. She walked straight into the stable like she hadn't just come back from the edge of something. He met her there, hands still dirty from firewood, breath caught halfway between a shout and a prayer. What happened? She didn't answer immediately. She pulled off her gloves slowly, each movement deliberate. "They've been watching us," she said. "4 of them." Sam's face didn't change, but his body tensed. "You're sure I left one behind?" Her voice was quiet. Her eyes were sharper than ever. "The others will tell Clayborn what I did." He reached for her arm where blood had begun to soak through. She didn't flinch, didn't move. Just looked at him with something that wasn't fear. "I'm not going to stop," she said. "I'm not asking you to." That night he poured her a shot of his oldest bourbon, the kind he saved for funerals and forgotten celebrations. She drank it without blinking. No toasts, no words. Later, when she rose to leave, he stopped her, a hand on her cheek. Not a demand, a question. "Stay tonight," he said. She didn't ask what he meant. She just stayed. The shotgun and the scar, a claim made in silence. The first time they kissed it wasn't sweet. It was slow, careful, not hesitant but aware, like brushing a scar to see if it still hurt. Their mouths met without urgency, without heat. It wasn't passion that drove them, it was recognition. 2 people who had bled into the same dirt, breathing in the same ghost air, finally admitting they didn't need to be alone anymore. When they laid down together, it was like staking a flag, not over each other, but beside. His touch was steady, reverent. Hers was certain, not soft. They moved with a quiet discipline of survivors who understood the stakes, not love, not lust, but belonging. Neither had known peace, but in that silence, their bodies found something close to it. After she lay with her back to him, boots beside the bed, breath deep but eyes open. He didn't ask what she was thinking. He already knew. The war in her heart wasn't over. It had only changed shape, but she let him hold her till morning. And for now, that was enough. The kiss, that wasn't sweet, a price for peace. The bounty came in spring. It started small. Quiet rewards whispered in saloons, $500 for the girl, $1,000 for the man. Then it got louder, posters nailed to telegraph poles. Men with badges that meant little riding into town asking too many questions. Holt Ridge began to feel like a fortress again. Gates watched, water-checked, shadows measured twice. Willa didn't hide. She rode through town with her gun belt low and her hair braided like a widow riding to war. A sawed-off rifle was slung across her saddle. She moved like a woman who'd stopped asking for forgiveness. Men came, drifters, bounty hunters, ex-soldiers with nothing left to lose. None of them left Holt Ridge alive. One tried to poison the well. She caught him kneeling at the stone lip hand, trembling over a canister. She put a bullet through his throat without hesitation, then stood over him while the blood soaked into the dust. "I'm going to burn them all," she said loud enough for the land to hear. "Every last Clayborn." Sam believed her. He'd believed her since the day she didn't flinch. And when a letter arrived from Amarillo, County seal stamped cold and final, it only confirmed what he already knew. The Clayborns had gained legal dominion over the eastern ridge. A Judge Harlan, who owed Sam both fear and favors, had written with regret they were being summoned. Not for questioning, for seizure, for surrender. Willa read the letter over Sam's shoulder. Her expression didn't change. Then she smiled, slow, cruel, inevitable. "It's time I stopped waiting. You want to go to Amarillo. I want to make them choke on their own words." Sam didn't argue. He saddled his best horse, cleaned his rifle, and together they rode into the fire. The march to Amarillo, riding into fire. The road to Amarillo was long, dry, and straight as a gun barrel. The kind of road where dust rises before you do, and the wind always seems to blow in the wrong direction. Sam and Willa rode it together, two shadows stretched across the open plain, their silence heavier than any saddlebag. They didn't speak much, didn't need to. The plan wasn't written down, wasn't even whispered. It existed in the look they shared across the morning frost, in the way Sam checked the straps on her rifle, in the way she glanced at the sky like it might throw bullets instead of rain. They weren't riding in as fugitives, not as outlaws. They were riding in as something sharper, like storm fronts bearing down on a town that forgot how to listen. Amarillo had changed since Sam last saw it. The railroad had grown fatter, carving new lines into the dirt like veins in a dying thing. The saloons had multiplied, the brothels too, and the courthouse. It stood like a tombstone, gray and too clean, with a clock tower ticking like a countdown. They arrived just before dusk, dismounted slow, tied the horses in the shadow of a chapel where no one prayed anymore. The streets watched them the way a town watches a wildfire, fascinated, fearful, unsure if it should run or get closer. Willa didn't look around. Her focus was forward, boots steady braid tight. She didn't dress for pity or power, just function. That was enough. They walked into the courthouse like they had every right to be there. Because they did. The trial that never was. Truth is just a loaded word. Judge Harlan sat heavy behind his desk, his robe thrown open like a wound. His eyes were sharp but dulled by comfort, and his lips cracked from a life of cigars and corruption. A pistol sat near his gavel, closer than it should have. He didn't stand. "You come to answer the summons?" he asked. His gaze lingered on Willa, longer than necessary. "Or stir up what's already settled?" Willa met his stare without blinking. "I came to tell the truth." He chuckled. Truth's just a story that lasts long enough to be printed. Sam stepped forward, voice firm. You owe me, Harlan. I've paid. Not enough. Sam tossed the letter on the judge's desk. You know what this is. Clayborn's got men in the State House. He's turning bribes into badges. They'll come for her. For me. And you'll stand behind your curtains and call it justice. She's under your roof, Harlan muttered. That don't make her clean. They say she's killed 4 already, the judge added. Shot the last one in the mouth while he begged. Willa leaned in. Her voice was steady. He wasn't begging. He was laughing. A silence fell over the room, a thick, rot-colored thing. The judge shifted, licked his lips. I can't protect you forever. Sooner or later, the real law's going to come down on Holt Ridge. Willa stepped forward. Then they'll see what Clayborn's made of. No verdict was given, no chains produced. But when they left, they weren't free. They were marked. The entire town watched them ride out. Some with awe, some with fear. One boy whispered, "She's the one that killed a man with his own knife." Neither of them looked back. The creak of fire, blood in the snow. The attack came at dawn 1 week later. Clayborn didn't ride alone. 20 men came with him, mercenaries, ex-lawmen, hired guns, bought with silver and hatred. Their rifles were polished, their horses armored. Among them were 2 brothers Willa recognized by face, not name, men who'd held her down while the barn burned. Briggs saw them first. The old cavalryman rode hard from the lookout point, breath like smoke in the cold. They're here, he said. All of them. Willa didn't blink. She didn't dress like someone preparing to run. She dressed like someone going to war. She strapped her rifle across her back, checked the bullets twice, and walked to the corral without looking back. Sam followed. He didn't try to stop her, didn't tell her to hide. He just said, "Whatever happens, no retreat." She nodded. They had spent days preparing coiling barbed wire along the southern road, digging trenches laced with oil. The bunkhouse had been turned into a fortress, and Willa had lit every lamp in the house before the sun even rose. The first rider hit a buried spike. His horse screamed. The second took a bullet to the throat before he could draw. Then came the fire. Willa lit the trenches herself. The flames roared up in a wall of orange and black, turning snow to steam and men to shadows. Sam took the roof. Willa held the gate. She didn't miss. Not once. 4 men fell before they breached the outer fence. Then 6. Then the rest scattered, unsure if any amount of coin was worth dying for. But Clayborn didn't run. He came through the smoke on a black stallion bottle in one hand, rifle in the other. "I didn't come for your land," he shouted. "I came for your bones." Willa stepped into view, gun low. "I still got 'em," she said. "Come take them." The girl who didn't flinch. First, Clayborn's laugh broke through the flames, cracked and hollow like it came from an old well. He kicked his horse forward through the smoke, slow and showy boots shining with blood that wasn't his. "You ain't that little girl no more, are you?" he sneered. Willa didn't respond. Not with words. She raised her revolver and with a single shot shattered the bottle in his hand. Glass exploded like brittle fire. The stallion bucked. Clayborn barely kept his seat. Still he came forward. She let him. Closer, closer, until he was near enough to smell the smoke in her hair, to see her eyes black and flat like the mouth of a barrel. He lifted his gun. Too late. She fired first, but not at his heart. His horse crumpled beneath him with a groan and a shriek. He fell hard, his body slamming into the snow-shoulder-dislocated rifle lost in the tumble. And then Sam stepped from the smoke. He didn't say a word, just leveled the shotgun and stared at the man in the dirt. Clayborn coughed blood into the white. "You gonna let her finish it?" he wheezed. "You gonna let that girl drag your name through the dust?" Sam didn't move. His face was a stone. Willa walked forward slowly, boots crunching through burned snow. She knelt over the man who had burned her life down. He looked up at her, one eye swollen, shut lips torn, breath sharp as glass. "I remember you now," he rasped. "You were crying, screaming when we lit the barn." She leaned in close, pressed the revolver to his chest. "I didn't scream," she said. "You did." Then she pulled the trigger. What the land remembered, the ridge and the dead. The rest fled before the sun rose. Word moved faster than bullets in Texas, and by the time Willa had cleaned her gun, the whole of Dalhart was whispering a new story. The girl at Holt Ridge had killed Clayborn herself, shot him clean through the heart, left his body for the birds. No lawmen came, no jury sat. There was no arrest, just silence. Sam and Willa buried the dead where the soil thawed quickest. No prayers, no markers, just shovels and sweat and the kind of quiet that clung to grief like second skin. One of the last men to die had Willa's name carved into the handle of his knife. She stared at it for a long time, then tossed it into the fire without a word. People stopped coming up the ridge after that, not out of fear of Willa, but out of reverence. Even the ranchers who once visited for branding or whiskey kept their distance. The land had changed. It wasn't fenced, but it was protected, not by barbed wire, but by the weight of what had happened. Dalhart whispered names, now names like curses and prayers. Widowmaker, war bride. Some said Sam had tamed her, others said she'd consumed him. Neither was true. They hadn't tamed each other. They'd simply survived the same fire. A winter without war, the ridge settles. That winter came hard and fast. A blizzard rolled over Holt Ridge so deep it swallowed the fences and kissed the window sills. For 3 days they were trapped. The firewood dwindled. The livestock groaned and died where they lay. And Sam took sick. It started with a chill in his bones, a cough he couldn't shake. Fever followed. He refused to stay in bed, but his hands trembled when he poured his coffee. On the second night he collapsed. Willa didn't panic. She boiled willow bark in whiskey-soaked wool in rendered bear fat and wrapped his chest while he slept fitfully, muttering names she didn't recognize. On the fourth night, he woke to find her beside him, eyes bloodshot, rifle across her lap, boots still on, half asleep, still listening. "You think I'm gonna leave you behind," he rasped. "You're too stubborn," she muttered. He looked at her, then raw and exposed. "I never asked what you wanted from me." She didn't blink. "I didn't want anything. Not at first. Now I want the land, the quiet, a place where my back's to a wall." Sam nodded. "I can give you that. It's all I've got. That's all I ever needed." He reached for her hand. She let him hold it. By morning the storm had passed. The sun broke over the ridge, pale but insistent. The trees shimmered with frost and the creek began to run again, slow and cold. Sam didn't rise that day, but he smiled, and that was enough. The season of rebuilding. Born from what didn't burn. Spring came late that year. The snow fought hard to stay clinging to the hills long after it was welcome. But eventually the thaw took root, and with it came work, the kind of work that blisters the hands and silences the mind. Willa didn't waste time mourning what the winter had taken. She buried the animals that hadn't survived, salvaged wood from the collapsed barn, stacked stone where fences once stood. Her body moved like a machine, each gesture purposeful, each callus earned. She wasn't just rebuilding a ranch. She was reclaiming something more sacred. A new barn rose where the old one had burned, stronger, leaner. The fence lines were reinforced with new posts, each one driven into the ground by her own arm. She didn't delegate. She didn't complain. She simply worked until her knuckles bled and her back ached. Sam watched from the porch. His cane rested beside him, his leg never quite the same since the fall, but his mind remained sharp. He dictated the ledgers from a worn leather chair, and Willa scribed them carefully onto yellowed paper. Numbers, supply lists, contracts, the business of surviving. They kept fewer cattle now, more horses, better ones. Sold hay to settlements that had once ignored them. Holt Ridge no longer stood for power. It stood for grit. In early April, Briggs died. Peaceful in his sleep under the stars he'd once camped beneath in war. Willa buried him by the edge of the ridge where the frost let her dig deep. She carved no name into the wood, just tucked his old pipe beneath the cross. "You stayed longer than anyone," she whispered. And beside her, Sam said nothing. But he didn't walk away for a long, long time. The stranger named Cassie, a photo and a claim. It was just past dusk when she rode in. A young woman no more than 20 atop a chestnut Mustang that moved like it had something to prove. Her cheeks were sunburnt and her coat torn at the seams. But her eyes, dark, wary, and unflinching, said she hadn't come to ask. "You, Willa Holt," she called. Willa stepped from the stable, dust on her sleeves, pistol heavy at her hip. I'm Cassie." The name meant nothing at first. "My father," the girl continued, "was Enoch Lang." The name dropped like a stone into still water. For a moment, Willa didn't breathe. "That's a lie," she said flatly. "No. My mother, she was a saloon girl in Midland. Never told me much. Just that he had another daughter, and that she watched him die." Cassie reached into her saddlebag, pulled out a photo. Old, creased, dust-worn, but real. Willa stared. Her father younger, full of life she'd never seen in him. And beside him, the woman hollow-eyed and haunted. Willa couldn't look away. "You come for the land, I came for you," Cassie said. "I've got nothing else." Willa didn't speak. "Not at first. Then you can stay. But you'll work for it." I expected to. And that was how it began, not with a hug or a welcome, but with a hard truth and a shared silence, the way all things began on Holt Ridge. The name beneath the ashes, what lingers after fire. Cassie kept to herself in the beginning. She mended fence lines, hauled water, dug ditches with hands too soft for the shovel but too proud to quit. Willa watched her closely, not with suspicion, but with the kind of caution one reserves for strangers bearing old names. Cassie didn't pretend to be tough. She admitted what she didn't know, but she listened, and she learned. When a rattlesnake bit one of the colts, Cassie didn't call for help. She stayed with the creature all night, whiskey in one hand, blade in the other. She sucked the venom out, stitched the leg, and whispered to the colt until morning. "I'm not weak," she told Willa later, voice low. "Just never had a place to stand." "You do now," Willa replied. "But you'll have to defend it." Sam took to Cassie faster than expected. Maybe it was her honesty. Maybe her eyes reminded him of Willa's before fire turned her to iron. He taught her to shoot better, read psalms to her at night when sleep came slow, told her stories Willa had never heard of Kansas cattle runs, of fevered dreams of the first woman he buried. Willa watched them from the porch one evening, arms crossed. She wasn't jealous, but she was unsettled. She'd grown used to being the only one who knew Sam's silences. Now she had to share them, and she wasn't sure what that meant yet. Smoke in the hills warnings, written in flame. Cassie saw the smoke first. It was a thin column on the eastern horizon, barely more than a shadow against the sunset. But it didn't twist like cooking fires or chimney smoke. It rose in a straight line, sharp and spiteful. A message. She rode hard back to the ranch. Willa and Sam met her at the edge of the property, rifles already in hand. The wind had shifted, carrying with it the scent of char and old metal. They rode toward it 3 abreast, like a memory come back with teeth. Sam's shotgun rested easy across his lap. Cassie gripped her borrowed rifle tighter than she needed to. Willa led her face unreadable. They reached it by darker shack in ruins, torched beyond purpose. At the foot of the fire, someone had carved letters into the dirt. Deep, deliberate, violent, Holt's Warlens. Cassie paled when she saw it. Willa knelt beside the letters, fingers tracing the cuts. "It's not Clayborn," Sam said. That line ended with fire. "No," Willa answered. "But it's someone who remembers. Someone who wants what he couldn't finish." They doused what was left of the blaze with water, though the message stayed etched deeper into the dirt than the ashes could cover. Trouble hadn't come yet. But it was circling. Return of the Irons. The family that followed fire. Trouble always comes in pieces. It started with cut fences, then missing calves. Someone poisoned the south well. A rusted sheriff's star was nailed to the barn door, bent unmarked, but meant to say, "We're watching." Dalhart offered no help. The sheriff shrugged. "Too far," he said. "Too many maybes." So Willa and Cassie rode out each night, rifles slung across their backs, horses tense beneath them. They watched from hilltops, waited at windmills, listened for riders who didn't belong. They caught the first man by the old watering trough. He was young, too young to be dangerous alone. His mouth worked faster than his hands, and when they cornered him, he laughed. "Name's Jonah Wells," he said. "Heard your legend. Figured if we made you bleed, you'd run." Willa stepped forward. "We." He didn't answer. She beat it out of him, not out of rage, out of necessity. Every question had a cost, and eventually, through split lips and loose teeth, he spoke. "There's a new family out east. Calls themselves the Irons. Mercs, thieves. One of 'em married a Clayborn widow." Willa didn't flinch. "They want what Clayborn couldn't take." Jonah gasped. "They want the ridge." She left him buried waist-deep in a ravine, hands bound facing east. Let the coyotes finish the warning. The canyon of fire. The one woman against 15. She didn't ask for help. Didn't wake Sam. Didn't tell Cassie more than she had to. She just saddled her mare, loaded a rifle, and rode east toward the gulch where ghosts gathered. The trail was narrow, cut through red stone and silence. The deeper she rode, the less the land remembered mercy. Trees thinned, dust thickened. Roads disappeared. She found them at dusk. 15 men. 2 women. One boy, barely grown, with a tattoo burned into his neck that matched the scar she remembered from Garza County. They camped like kings, drunk on firelight and the stories of others. Willa didn't charge in. She waited, watched, memorized shifts, noted where the horses were tied, where the guns were stacked. She saw the woman with a Clayborn ring laughing beside a man with a scar under his eye. When the wind shifted, she lit the dynamite. The canyon mouth exploded in a blast of rock and dust. Horses screamed, men stumbled. Smoke rolled thick and blinding. She moved like vengeance incarnate through fire and echo. 5 fell before they saw her. 3 more before they aimed straight. The woman screamed for mercy. Willa didn't stop. She emptied her last round into the boy with the scar. His hand still reached for the knife when he hit the ground. And then silence. She didn't stay to gloat. Just looted bullets from the dead found her mare, limping but alive, and rode back toward Holt Ridge under a blood-stained moon. Cassie met her at the gate. "Did you get them?" Willa nodded once. Cassie didn't ask for details. Some fires don't need telling. The return of a different woman, smoke on her shoulders. When Willa returned to Holt Ridge, the smoke still clung to her coat. It wasn't the kind you washed off. It was the kind that settled into your bones, into your smell, into the way people looked at you. Her mare limped beneath her, covered in ash. Her rifle was empty. Her eyes were not. Cassie met her at the gate. One look was enough. "Did you get them?" she asked. Willa nodded once. That was all. Sam was on the porch. He watched her ride up, didn't speak at first. Didn't rise. His face had aged 10 years in 10 days. When she stepped from the saddle, he saw her, saw what she had become and what she had shed. "You made it back," he said softly. "I always do." He reached out. She took his hand, dirt and gunpowder and blood still on her skin. That night she sat at his feet by the fire. Her head rested against his knee like it had the first winter she stayed, when nothing had been certain but survival. Sam read from one of the books he liked something about the land, about storms, about the way men fall short of the world they try to own. She listened without comment. Outside, the coyotes kept to the far hills. The wind carried no threats, and for the first time in years, no one was coming. The autumn of forgiveness. When the land softened, the autumn that followed came in gentle. It was as if the land itself decided to exhale after holding its breath too long. Rain came steady. The grass grew thicker than it had in seasons. The creek near the northern pasture ran full clear and cold all the way through September. Birds returned small flocks that danced above the treetops like smoke in reverse. The horses grew calm. Even the cattle seemed less skittish. Cassie rose with the sun each day, circling the fence lines like a sentinel. She learned the lay of the land like scripture. She didn't have to be told twice. She didn't wait for orders. She moved with a quiet that Willa recognized. Willa gave her space, didn't hover, didn't correct. She let Cassie grow into the ridge the same way she had through watching through wounds, through stubborn steps forward. The house, too, changed. The porch got new boards. The kitchen floor stopped creaking in that one spot near the stove. Sam slept more, sat longer, read slower, but he was there. And for a time, that was enough. They never spoke about peace. Peace was too big a word for people like them. But they knew what it looked like now. It looked like a sky that didn't threaten, like a rifle that stayed clean, like Cassie's quiet laughter as she fed the horses, and like Willa sitting on the hill at dusk not to scout, but to remember. The last winter Sam saw a chair by the window. The cold came early that year. Not sharp like the winters before, but deep. It settled into Sam's bones and stayed there. He walked slower, leaned heavier on his cane, but he never asked for help. When Willa offered an arm, he waved her off with a grunt. "Still, my land," he muttered. "I know," she always replied. "I'm just borrowing it." The house remained warm. Cassie brought in extra wood each night without being asked. Willa took over the ledgers when Sam's handwriting grew shaky. She kept the ink clean, the numbers honest. Sam spent his days in the chair by the window watching the trees shift and the snow gather. He rarely spoke, but when he did, it was softer. "You've done what you came for," he said one morning, eyes still on the horizon. "You could leave now." "I didn't come for vengeance," she answered. "I stayed for the rest." He nodded, but the light behind his eyes was dimming. Slowly, quietly. They never spoke of marriage, never named what they had. But in the mornings he still touched her hand before she rose, and at night she still pulled the blanket up to his chest before the fire died out. One morning a rider came, a lawman from Amarillo, clean-shaven and quiet. He brought papers, not a warrant, not a threat. Recognition. The killings on Holt Ridge had been ruled self-defense. There would be no trial, no more bounties, no more blood. "You're free," the lawman said. Willa stared at the stamp on the letter for a long time, then replied, "Not free, just quiet now. The ring and the wind." What the coyotes meant. That fall, the sky bled orange more nights than not. Sam sat on the porch most evenings wrapped in a coat too big for his frame, his eyes fixed on the ridgeline like he was waiting for a sign. And one morning, just before the frost, he got one. "I heard coyotes," he said. Willa looked at him. "Good. Means the land's still moving." He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "Before my mother died," he began, his voice rough as old bark. "She told me no woman ever took her name unless she could rope the wind." He reached into his coat and pulled out a silver ring, plain shaped like a horseshoe smoothed by time. Willa stared at it. "I already have your name," she said, "but not the ring." "I don't need it." "I know," he said, "but I want you to have it." She took it. It fit like it had always been waiting for her finger. And for the first time since the snow that brought her here, she smiled without baring her teeth. The wind moved different that night, softer, almost warm. Like it too had been waiting for her to stop running. The slow years, what survived? After the fire, the years didn't pass so much as grind forward like wagon wheels over gravel, slow and steady with every step earned. Holt Ridge became quieter, not empty, just less haunted. Willa still rose before the sun rode. The lines checked the wells, but she did so with less tension in her shoulders, less iron in her step. The rifle stayed slung, but she no longer reached for it without cause. Cassie took over most of the ledgers, hired new help, ran the numbers clean. By 22, she had a writer's posture and a foreman's eye. She kept a photo of Enoch Lang, their father, in the barn, not because it brought comfort, but because it reminded her how far she'd come without him. Willa let her lead, not because she was tired, but because she trusted her. The ranch was smaller now, but it ran honest. They bred horses, sold hay, let the land breathe. Still men came now and then, riders from places that didn't read newspapers, young guns with bright pistols and fragile egos, men looking to make their name by breaking hers. None of them left with breath in their lungs. In the spring of their 4th year, peace felt almost believable. The war in Willa didn't disappear. It simply went quiet, like a revolver kept loaded but clean. She had nothing left to prove, only land to keep. The girl at the depot, again coins and memory. Once a year, Willa rode to Dalhart. She didn't dress up, didn't speak to townsfolk. She bought whiskey left coin for the church bell and walked to the bench outside the depot, the one where Sam had found her. The bench hadn't changed. Same rust, same slats worn smooth by wind and waiting. She sat for a while, just watching. The trains still howled through town. The air still smelled of coal and cold. Sometimes she saw them girls stepping off boxcars with nothing but threadbare coats and bruises behind their eyes. Girls with nowhere to go, and no name worth saying out loud. She never spoke to them, but she always left something behind, a coin wrapped in wax paper. Sometimes a biscuit, sometimes just a folded note that read, "You're not alone. Not anymore." Then she walked away before anyone saw her face. Stories grew longer in Dalhart with every passing year. They said she once shot a man through 2 walls, that she slept standing up, that she could speak to ghosts. She never denied any of it. She just rode home, saddle creaking under her, the wind brushing her braid, because truth didn't need defense. It just needed to last. The land that gave back what grew after war. It began slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice. Fruit trees started blooming near the edge of the creek. Apples, peaches, even a plum tree, though no one remembered planting them. Wild flowers pushed up between fence posts. Springs reappeared where the soil had gone dry decades ago. Horses calmed faster beneath Willa's hand, even the stubborn colts that once kicked at shadows. The land was changing. It wasn't just recovery. It was gratitude. Years of violence had scorched Holt Ridge down to its bones. But now something else was rising from the soot, a kind of quiet resilience that went deeper than fences or profit. It was in the way grass returned to scars left by wagon wheels, in how the wind lost its teeth and began to hum instead of howl. Willa planted her first garden in her 40th year. Tomatoes, beans, a few crooked rows of wild carrots. She didn't do it for survival. She did it to see what the earth still remembered. Cassie took over most of the ranch's business, contracts, shipments, hiring help that stuck. She was good at it, better than Willa had ever been. Sharp-eyed and steady-handed, with just enough warmth to keep people loyal. Willa didn't step back entirely, but she stepped aside, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she had to guard her place. She just tended it. The last breath, Sam by the window. When Sam died, it wasn't dramatic. No fever, no blood, no gunshot in the distance. He simply woke early, made his coffee, sat in the old chair by the window, and didn't get up again. The sun climbed, the hours passed, and when Willa found him, his eyes were closed, his hand still warm from the mug. She didn't cry. She didn't call Cassie. She just knelt beside him and held his hand until it went cold. The funeral was small. Cassie, 3 ranchers who still had enough spine to come. The preacher from Eagle Fork who said nothing useless. Just bowed his head and stepped back. Willa scattered his ashes from the saddle of his old gelding. She rode to the high ridge where the land touched sky and let the wind take him. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The way she sat, straight back, silent, her shadow long across the slope, said more than words ever could. Later that evening, she buried his cane beneath the porch, left his chair by the window where it had always been. The next morning, she put on his hat. And it fit. The tree without a name. What stayed behind? Time didn't stop. It never does. But on Holt Ridge it slowed enough for something sacred to settle. Willa didn't vanish after Sam's death like a ghost from a storybook. She stayed, rode less, spoke softer, started planting things with purpose instead of spite. Tomatoes turned to squash, wildflowers into ordered rows, and right where Sam used to sit beneath the southern window that caught the morning light, she planted a tree. She didn't say what kind, didn't name it, just pressed the roots into the soil with her bare hands and let the wind do the rest. Years passed. Cassie ran the ranch with grace and grit. She carried the books with the same precision Sam once did. She never removed Willa's name from the ledgers, even when she handled every deal. Willa was still the first to rise, still the last to bed. But she no longer checked the back trail every night. She no longer waited for thunder to come over the ridge. Her war had gone quiet. Not gone, just resting. And when her time came, it was as soft as a breath drawn in and never released. Cassie found her on the porch, boots muddy from the garden hat tilted low. They buried her beside Sam. No stone, just the tree taller now, branches reaching toward the horizon like it remembered everything. And in town, when they spoke her name, it wasn't fear they spoke with anymore. It was awe. The funeral without fire, the ones they came for. When Willa died, no telegrams were sent, no bells tolled, no gunshots were fired into the sky. But they came anyway, not out of duty, but because something in them couldn't stay away. Ranchers from distant valleys, widows with weathered hands, sheriffs with eyes like rain, and a few women, quiet, strong eyes forward, who had once stepped off trains in Dalhart, holding nothing but hunger and shame. They'd found something waiting for them back then. A coat, a coin, a name. Now they came to return it. Cassie didn't speak at the funeral. Neither did the preacher. There were no hymns, no verses, no neat summaries, just silence and the sound of boots shifting on cold ground. They laid Willa down beside Sam under the tree that had grown thick with memory. Cassie placed her hat over the grave and walked away without looking back. Some lives are too big for eulogies, so they let the land speak for her instead. The women who got off the train legacy. Wrapped in paper, Cassie kept the ranch running, not because she owed it to Willa, but because she understood now it wasn't just land. It was inheritance without blood, legacy without legal deed. She rode every morning, eyes sharp for signs, ears trained to the rustle of threat. But none came. Not anymore. The ridge had become holy, not clean, not gentle, but protected, held together by the stories that had rooted deeper than any fence post. Cassie made the same trip to Dalhart once a year. Same bench, same depot. She didn't stay long. Just sat for a while, let the wind hit her face, and left behind what Willa used to a biscuit. A coin. A note. Sometimes the girl who found it cried. Sometimes they just tucked it into their coat and walked off toward the edge of town, toward wherever the road might finally begin. Cassie never asked who they became. She just made sure they had something Willa never did when she arrived a second chance. The wind across Holt Ridge, what will never be lost. Years blurred into seasons. The tree above Willa and Sam grew wide enough to cast shade over both graves. Its roots dug deep, anchoring not just soil, but story. Children were told not to play too close. Not out of fear, but reverence. Cassie kept things running simple. Horses, hay, no more cattle, no more bullets. But every now and then someone would ride up from nowhere, eyes full of hunger, or ghosts asking if the stories were true. She'd nod. Offer water. and tell them to ride on. Because Holt Ridge wasn't for the taking, it was for the keeping. And the wind remembered. It carried her name across the tall grass, whispered through the slats in the old barn, twisted through the rafters of the porch, where Sam once sat with his shotgun across his lap. Willa Holt. Not outlaw, not savior, something older than both. A scar turned sacred, a fire turned to root, a name that never needed carving into stone because it had already been carved into the land. Forever